You ever get that feeling like you're watching the same story play out over and over again, maybe just slightly different details each time, almost like a tragic film stuck on repeat? Well, that feeling, unfortunately, it kind of captures a core truth about one of the most, well, enduring and heartbreaking conflicts of our time. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Israel-Hamas conflict. We're going to look closely at those patterns of violence and temporary ceasefires that have defined the region for years, and also the staggering human cost and the really intricate, often frustrating international efforts to find some kind of lasting peace.
Yeah, and to really help you get a handle on this incredibly complex situation, we've pulled together quite a bit. Recent analyses, historical timelines, some direct perspectives, too. We're drawing on insights from places like the Israel Policy Forum, the University of Michigan's Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, Al Jazeera, Invest, Oxfam International, and Judicature. Quite a range.
Absolutely. And our mission for you today is to really extract the most important nuggets from all that material. We want to help you quickly understand the underlying conditions, the legal side of things, the complexities, and what's truly blocking our resolution, so you can walk away feeling genuinely well-informed.
Okay, so let's start by trying to understand what the Israel Policy Forum calls the Israel-Hamas cycle. It's this six-stage pattern that has, for years, really kind of dictated the rhythm of this conflict.
A six-stage cycle. Okay, let's unpack that. What are these stages? How does it usually kick off?
Well, it starts with what they call a spark. This is some kind of triggering event, that quickly escalates things. Could be a Hamas rocket fire, could be a specific Israeli military response. And that spark, well, it ignites into the conflict stage. That's when you see more widespread Hamas rocket fire coming out of Gaza, and a strong Israeli military counter-response.
Right, and as things heat up, that's when you start seeing other countries getting involved. That's the pressure stage.
That's exactly it, the pressure phase. The U.S., Arab states, the broader international community, they typically ramp up diplomatic efforts, urging everyone to stop the fighting.
And that pressure, hopefully, leads somewhere.
Usually, yeah, it culminates in a ceasefire, often brokered by key players in the region, like Egypt or Qatar, and frequently with the U.S. involved in the background, or sometimes more directly.
Okay, so the fighting stops. Then what? The focus shifts to recovery.
Pretty much. That's the reconstruction phase. You see aid and resources start to flow back into Gaza, trying to rebuild, basically. And then the final stage, the status quo. It sounds like, well, an uneasy quiet. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds about right. An uneasy quiet.
It's a good way to put it. In the status quo phase, Hamas is sort of incentivized to keep things quiet, usually through economic concessions from Israel, things like allowing goods into Gaza or maybe letting Gazans cross into Israel for work. It's a fragile stability, though. It's definitely not real peace.
And we've seen this cycle play out again and again, haven't we, over the last, 15 years or so? Can you maybe give us a couple of concrete examples just to illustrate the pattern?
Sure. Think back to December 2008. Operation Cast Lead.
Yeah.
That was a 22-day Israeli operation, a response to Hamas rockets. It ended with a unilateral Israeli ceasefire, but it was backed by U.S. assurances about, stopping arms flowing to Hamas.
Okay. Or November 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense. That was shorter, right? Like 8 days.
Yeah.
Israel targeted a senior Hamas military guy, and that ended with a ceasefire brokered by Egypt and the U.S.
Exactly. And then maybe the more significant one, July 2014, Operation Protective Edge. That was a much longer war, 7 weeks, triggered by the awful murder of 3 Israeli teenagers. It ended, again, with an Egyptian brokered ceasefire. But what's really interesting afterwards is that Prime Minister Netanyahu's government actually allowed Qatar to deliver millions, literally millions in cash, directly to Hamas. It was seen as this big economic carrot for quiet. And it kind of worked for about 5 years.
Wow. Cash directly to Hamas. That's quite something. And then more recently, May 2021, Operation Guardian of the Walls. That kicked off because of protests in East Jerusalem, right? And it followed a similar path.
It did. Ceasefire brokered by Egypt, Qatar, the UN. And then pretty quickly after, Israel started issuing work permits for Gazans to work inside Israel. Again, using that economic leverage, trying to keep things calm.
So looking back at all these instances.
Yeah, what becomes really, really clear is that, while these ceasefires were obviously desperately needed pauses, they consistently fail to actually change the fundamental situation, the status quo, or address those really deep-rooted conditions that just kept sparking the violence in the first place.
And what are those underlying conditions, the things that never seem to get resolved?
Well, there are a few key ones. You've got Hamas's long-term stated goal of destroying Israel. That's fundamental to their ideology. Then you have Israel's absolute unwillingness to tolerate provocations and serious threats coming from Hamas in Gaza. And layered on top of all that, you have the truly dire humanitarian situation inside Gaza, made much worse by Israel's blockade, yes, but also by Hamas's own repressive governance within Gaza.
Right. So that's the cycle, the pattern we saw playing out for years. Uneasy quiet, spark, conflict, pressure, ceasefire, reconstruction, back to uneasy quiet. But then October 7th, 2023 happened. And it feels like that wasn't just another turn of the wheel, was it? It felt like it broke the whole machine. How fundamentally did that attack, the surprise attack on Simchat Torah, change things, both in scale and maybe in the goals of each side?
Oh, fundamentally. You're absolutely right to call it a seismic shift. This wasn't just another round of escalation, not even close. You had thousands of Hamas militants pouring across the border into Israeli communities, killing over 1,200 Israelis, taking more than 200 people captive back into Gaza. I mean, the scale, the brutality, it was completely unprecedented in this conflict.
So the old playbook just got thrown out.
Completely torn up. The old idea of just seeking quiet or trying to contain Hamas, that went out the window on October 7th. Israel's stated goal now isn't just deterrence. It's the complete dismantling of Hamas regime in Gaza. That's their objective. And they've been very clear. They've rejected ending the war until they feel Hamas forces are defeated. That's a major shift from previous conflicts.
And Hamas' position.
Also hardened. Hamas has vowed to carry out more October 7th-style attacks. So what you see now is a much more entrenched, kind of maximalist position on both sides, far more than in any of those previous cycles we talked about.
It's crucial to understand that strategic cycle, definitely. But it's just as vital, maybe more so, to grasp the immense human cost, the tragedy unfolding for ordinary people, especially the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That Israeli blockade, it's been in place since Hamas took control back in 2007, right?
Yeah.
What has the impact been?
Devastating. Just devastating. Oxfam International puts it starkly. The blockade has devastated Gaza's economy, and it's left the people there largely cut off from the outside world. The economic collapse, the infrastructure collapse, it's staggering. Gaza's economy just in 2024 is estimated to have shrunk by 83%.
83% contraction. That's almost unbelievable.
It's hard to fathom. And look at housing. Over 60% of the housing stock destroyed. Just rebuilding the homes is estimated to cost something like $15.2 billion.
Yeah.
Billion with a B.
And it's not just homes, is it? It's everything. Power, healthcare.
Everything. You've had near total blackout since October 2023 because the main power plant was destroyed. In healthcare, only about 37% of primary care facilities are even functional. And they need something like $6.9 billion just for healthcare infrastructure, just to provide basic services.
Basic services. And what about essentials? Food, water.
Dire, truly dire. According to Oxfam again, 1 million Palestinians in Gaza don't have enough food. 1 million people. The water situation is critical. Before this latest escalation, 96% of water was undrinkable. 96%. And getting materials in to fix water infrastructure, less than 16% of what's needed actually reaches Gaza.
So people can't work either.
Well, how can they? Almost half of the working age population are unemployed. That's one of the highest unemployment rates anywhere in the world.
Those numbers, 60% housing destroyed, 96% undrinkable water, half the population unemployed. They're just crushing. It's almost hard to process the scale of suffering they represent. And beyond the physical destruction, the psychological toll. I mean, I can only imagine, what do we know about that? Especially for kids.
The UN estimates that at least 360,000 children in Gaza will need psychosocial support, minimum. It's a crisis that gets so deep, creating just profound trauma that will last for generations. And it's also really important, I think, to understand the perspectives of Gazans themselves. It's complex.
How so?
Well, a survey from January 2025 done by Artists International found something interesting. While support for Hamas among Gazans seems to have gone down, the alternatives, well, they draw even less support. So Hamas kind of maintains influence almost by default, despite maybe declining popularity.
That is surprising. No clear alternative emerging even now. And the survey also said the war has strengthened Gaza's commitment to maximalist political goals. What does that mean in practice?
It means increased opposition to a two-state solution, which used to be the mainstream framework, and more support, apparently, for the actual dissolution of Israel. The survey found about half expected peace eventually, but look how they were divided. Roughly 24% expected peace through a negotiated outcome, but almost the same number, 25%, expected peace to arise from Israel's dissolution.
Wow, that's a really stark split, almost contradictory views of what peace even looks like.
It really is. And you hear this reflected in voices from Gaza. Afaf al-Najjar, a Palestinian journalist there, told Al Jazeera that ceasefires just feel like pauses in a constant nightmare. She said, temporary peace cannot replace the right to live freely and to dream beyond survival. It points to these really strong core values, their Palestinian identity, their religious identity, their deep attachment to the land. Any future peace, if it's going to stick, has to somehow address those fundamental things.
Okay, so given this incredibly entrenched cycle, this immense human cost, these complex perspectives, where does international mediation fit in? And international law? What role are outsiders playing?
Well, traditionally, Egypt and Qatar have been the main players. They're the key mediators, often working with the U.S. and the UN. They're the ones who usually broker the ceasefires, try to facilitate aid getting in. They're the go-betweens.
Right, like that phased agreement back in January 2025. The idea was to halt the fighting, get more aid in, talk about Israeli withdrawal, plan reconstruction, and it did lead to more aid trucks getting in, right? Over 10,000 by early February. So progress can happen, even if it's fragile.
It can, absolutely. Temporary progress, at least. But fast forward to July 2025, and you still see these huge sticking points, these core issues that just block real progress. Hamas, for instance, flatly rejects disarmament. They insist any real deal must involve Israel's full withdrawal and cessation of military actions. For Israel, that's a complete non-starter, obviously.
And the recent talks in Qatar, the indirect ones in early July, they didn't go anywhere.
Ended inconclusively, is the report. And there were suggestions the Israeli team didn't have a sufficient mandate to reach an agreement. Add that to the deep, deep mistrust on both sides and these completely opposite political goals. It makes genuine progress incredibly difficult. Plus, you keep seeing things like renewed Israeli airstrikes, ground operations like back in March 2025. These things just shatter ceasefires and tragically lead to more deaths. The reports mention over 50,000 Palestinians killed by then. It's just horrific.
It feels like one step forward, maybe, then 3 steps back.
It often feels that way. And it really raises big cards about international law, its effectiveness. We have international humanitarian law, IHL, the Geneva Conventions, frameworks that are supposed to govern how wars are fought. But applying principles like distinction, only hitting military targets, or proportionality, avoiding excessive civilian harm is incredibly hard in this kind of asymmetric urban warfare, especially in Gaza, where fighters often operate very close to or even among civilians.
So the laws exist on paper, but putting them into practice in the middle of intense urban fighting is, well, it sounds almost impossible sometimes. Is international law more of a guideline than an enforceable rulebook in these situations?
That's a really good way to put it, a guideline. Because the key point, is that IHL lacks an enforcement mechanism. It just doesn't have teeth. Compliance really depends on the militaries themselves choosing to follow the rules, and maybe pressure from international criticism. And historically, that pressure has had, limited and temporary effects. Now, international law does say parties have to allow humanitarian aid through. Blocking it may constitute a war crime.
Which is why the ICC got involved, the International Criminal Court.
Exactly. That's why their investigation and issuing those arrest warrants for 3 Hamas officials and 2 Israeli officials, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant back in May 2024, was such a big deal. But again, enforcement is the problem. The ICC itself can't arrest anyone. It relies entirely on member states to actually do it, and that's a huge political hurdle.
Okay, looking ahead then. Despite all these massive challenges, the ongoing fighting, the deep mistrust, if, and it's a big if, but if a durable ceasefire eventually takes hold, could there actually be significant investment opportunities, given the sheer scale of destruction in Gaza?
Potentially, yes. The level of destruction is so fast, the needs are immense, which means, yes, potentially huge opportunities for investment if a lasting peace emerges. We mentioned that $15.2 billion just for housing. Think about what that means for infrastructure and construction. Basic materials, cement, steel, heavy equipment. the demand would be enormous.
And beyond construction.
Healthcare, definitely. Rebuilding clinics, hospitals, needing medical supplies, maybe even opportunities in telehealth to reach people. Energy is another big one. The power grid needs a total rebuild. That could be opportunities for traditional energy, maybe natural gas imports, but also for renewables like solar projects. And don't forget agriculture and food security. So much farmland is damaged, there'd be a need for irrigation systems, seeds, equipment, everything to get food production going again.
So huge potential needs, huge potential opportunities, but also huge risks, right?
Immense risks. The biggest one is ceasefire fragility. Violence could flare up again at any moment, derailing everything. Investments could literally go up in smoke. There are also real concerns about aid diversion, corruption, mismanagement within Gaza. Making sure resources actually get used for reconstruction is a major challenge.
And the wider region is hardly stable either.
Exactly. Geopolitical spillover. Tensions between Israel and Iran, for instance. These things can disrupt supply chains, increase regional instability, and make any long-term investment feel very precarious.
So if someone was considering investing in a post-conflict Gaza scenario, what's the practical advice?
Well, Victor Hale from A-Invest put it pretty clearly. Basically, wait for concrete ceasefire terms and funding commitments before committing capital. Don't jump in too early. He stressed needing patience, discipline, and a keen eye for shifting risks. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. It requires careful calculation and a tolerance for very high risk.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at that repeating cycle of conflict and pause in the Israel-Hamas dynamic. We've explored the truly devastating humanitarian reality for people in Gaza. We've examined the complex, often frustrating world of international mediation and law. And we even peeked at the potential economic opportunities and the, frankly, enormous risks that might lie ahead. It's just so clear this isn't some distant news story. It's a deep, multi-layered human struggle. So many historical roots, such far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. And our goal with this deep dive, really, was to give you a more comprehensive picture, something that goes beyond just the daily headlines, to equip you with insights into maybe why things are the way they are and what those real stubborn obstacles to a lasting peace actually are.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. We heard about that split among Gazans regarding peace, some hoping for a negotiated deal, others expecting peace only through Israel's dissolution. And you have Hamas firmly rejecting disarmament, while Israel remains determined to dismantle Hamas. Given that the traditional approaches, the ceasefires, the mediation efforts have repeatedly fallen short, what kind of new thinking, what completely different approaches might actually break this cycle? What would it truly take for the status quo we discussed not just to pause, but to fundamentally change? And what would that change mean for everyone involved and for the entire region? Lots to consider there.